Welcome to IT Fundamentals Training Series. This is your host, Mark Haupt. This is episode 43, and today we're going to talk about memory management. Welcome to the IT Fundamentals Training Series. This is your host, Mark Haupt. Today we're going to talk about memory management, and a lot of folks that know something about memory might be wondering why, because the only way to manage memory is to add or subtract memory physically from a computer. And that would be true when you're talking about RAM. However, the part that the book wants you to understand is not RAM, because we've already gone over RAM. We've already talked about the difference between volatile and non-volatile memory, and the fact that RAM is volatile memory. We've talked about how the computer uses the CPU to store in RAM repeatable tasks in order to make them faster, so you don't have to recalculate the mathematical equations that the CPU calculates each time in order to present the same thing over and over again. Whoa, you just got an overview of RAM once again. Hopefully that reminds you. But what this book wants you to understand about memory is exactly that. The more memory, the better. You can put as much memory as you need to or want to afford into a computer up to that motherboard's limit. And I know I've got some computers that are running 128 gigabits of RAM, which is probably way more than anybody needs. Right now, 64 gigabits for the RAM is probably a good place to be sitting if you have games and other things you want to run. But here's what you need to know is that there is a piece of memory that you can configure. And in exercise 4.5, which I really want you to go over, you can configure what's called virtual memory. So let's talk about this virtual memory for a second. It remains volatile memory, but it sits on a non-volatile disk. So what that means is this: the memory does get overwritten, the memory does get erased, but whenever your RAM is so overloaded, you can have this thing called a swap file or a page file. As the book says, the item is even called pagefile.sys inside of your Windows folder, and you can configure that in there. This is what you need to know is those two terms. First of all, you need to know that the page file resides on your hard drive. It doesn't matter whether it's an SSD or an actual HDD type of hard drive, it resides on that. Keep in mind that hard drives, accessing the hard drive, it runs much slower than it does accessing RAM. So what goes into that page file or that swap file are calculations that are used over and over again that the volatile memory believes that it needs to store, or the computer actually, because the volatile memory itself, it's more the operating system that's managing that, needs to store that because it's being used over and over and over again, even beyond the usual over and over again that the RAM has. And so it's the coupling thing, and when the RAM itself is being overutilized. So with that said, if your RAM is even being overutilized to the point you need a page file or a swap file, you probably need to take a look at stepping your RAM up into the next realm. So if you're at 16 gig, going to the 32 gig. If you're at 32, going to 64, and so on and so forth. All right, so the page file and swap file, they sit on your hard drive or an SSD type of scenario, or you could possibly even configure it. I've done it before where it sits on a USB drive plugged into your computer. I do not recommend that, by the way. So Windows, I'm just going off a couple of things here in the book because I want to make sure we get them right, is that Windows automatically sets the page file size to 1.5 times the amount of physical RAM. So if you have 32 gigs of RAM, 1 times that will be 32 plus a half, which would be plus 16. So 32 and 16, you're going to have 48 gigabits of space put on your drive, on your hard drive, that is allocated towards this page file. Now, you can go in and configure this, which is what exercise 4.5 has you do, up to 3 times that. So you're looking at 32 plus 32 plus 32, which is 64, plus 32, which is 96 gigabits worth of RAM that you could have in your page file or swap file. Now, do keep in mind that, again, page file swap files are not going to run as fast as your RAM will, number one. Number two is they are designed as an overflow. They are not designed as a replacement. I've tried to use them as replacement before by using USB thumb drives plugged in, and it just doesn't work as well. I thought I would be smarter than the computer at one point, and I thought that maybe if I plugged in one of these 32 gig USB drives a number of years back and when I only had 8 gigs on my computer, that I could push the page file up as high as I could make it and get this 32 extra gigs worth of RAM. It doesn't really work that way. It's really just that overflow. If the RAM bucket overflows, this is where some things can go that might help you down the line, and you probably wouldn't even notice it. So that said, that's what you need to know for the testing. You need to know put as much RAM in the system as you can. That swap file or page file are essentially the same thing. Pagefile.sys is the configuration file that you will utilize with Windows in order to configure it. It can be 1.5 times or up to 3 times the amount of RAM that's in your computer, and that it resides on your SSD. All those things are what you need to know. Now, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go and change your virtual minute. You're going to manage your virtual memory on your Windows 10, Windows 11 computer. I want you to go do exercise 4.5 right now. I'm going away, so you can go do that. Go make it happen later on.